Alrighty, y'all. Thank y'all so much for joining tonight for K and Beyond campaign partner briefing. My name is Wisdom Cole, and I'm the Interim National Director for the NAACP Youth and College Division. And I'm so happy that all of you could join us here tonight. Glad you could be with us. We have a very exciting call tonight, a training, but also a briefing to really update you on the work that we're doing to cancel student debt, recognizing that we had an amazing win this last Friday where the extension on the pause was extended till January 31st. And so tonight we're going to be going over some key updates of the campaign, how people can join and partner with us, as well as some research insights to make sure that we are hitting the nail on the head. But as we begin, I'd like to welcome our President and CEO, President Derek Johnson, to give some greetings and opening remarks.
Great, thank you, Wisdom, and great job in leading this campaign. It's really important to understand that the issues around student loan debt is an issue of wealth and our inability to grow wealth. So many of us are first and second generation college goers, and as a result of that, had to depend on student loan. But unfortunately, many states began to finance higher education on the back of working America. And they did that so they didn't have to increase taxes on their rich friends. That's not how any society should treat its citizens. That's not how we can grow as a society. In fact, that's not the way we should drive towards a future that's not only more inclusive, but it's economically stable for the majority of the citizens in this country. Student loan debt crisis has disproportionately hit the African American community in ways in which it is now become generational. We heard testimony on our last webinar where there was a parent who was still paying off a student loan and a child entering college taking out student loans. That's economic poverty in a way in which the chains cannot be broken unless there's some immediate action. So we're proud to partner with Senator Elizabeth Warren, who's been a champion on this issue and so many other issues as it relates to predatory financial matters as they target communities like the African American communities. We're also proud to partner with Dr. Andre Perry, someone I've known for a long time, as he has assumed a role at the Brookings Institute to provide the necessary research to support what we all know so well. So I'm going to stop there and thank everyone for joining us this evening as we continue to push this campaign so that we can cancel student loan debt. And if we are able to do that, we can truly live the promise of America. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Johnson, for those words. Really appreciate that. And now it's my honor to really introduce and bring on somebody who has been a continued ally, somebody who has been in this fight with us to cancel student debt, Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's such an honor to be here with Wisdom Cole and Dr. Perry and with President Johnson. President Johnson, you have been amazing in your leadership on this issue. I'm proud to be in the fight with all of you. And I'm glad to be here tonight to talk about a critical issue for racial justice and for our economy, the student loan debt crisis. So how about we start with some numbers? 43 million borrowers hold about $1.5 trillion in student loan debt. That's more debt than credit card debt, more debt than car loan debt, more debt than any other consumer debt besides mortgages. Now, this is a debt disproportionately on young people, although, as you hear, it's about people in middle ages. And in fact, there are people who today are seeing their Social Security checks get garnished to pay for student loan debt. But that student loan debt is a real problem, not only for the people who are trying to manage it themselves, it is a drag on our whole economy. Student loan debt is reducing homeownership rates, it's leading fewer people to start small businesses, and it's forcing students to leave school before they get a degree. In fact, here's something to think about. Whenever you hear somebody talk about student loan debt, they say, oh, why are we just trying to help kids who've already made it through college? Keep in mind, about 4 out of every 10 people who are carrying student loan debt don't have a college degree. They tried, but life happened, you know? Baby came, they were working 3 jobs, mom got sick, and it didn't work out for them to finish. Now they're earning at the level a high school graduate earns, but they're trying to pay off college loan debt. These people are trapped and it hurts. This is fundamentally a racial justice issue. Black and brown students take on more debt to go to school. They take out more debt while they're in school, and they have a harder time paying it off when they get out of school. And these racial disparities can't just be ignored or washed away. You know, let me just give you one fact. We could just bury you in facts here. In fact, when President Johnson and I get a chance to get together, we just hit each other with these over and over, talking about the facts around student loan debt. But I want to point one out to you in particular. And that is, what happens to people 20 years after they started school? Think about that. They went to school, did their best, and now they're out. They've been earning for a long time. What happens to them? Well, 20 years after they borrowed money to go to school, the median white borrower owes about 6% of the total amount they originally borrowed. In other words, 20 years later, they're still paying, but the end is in sight. They can see it coming. They just have 6% of that loan left. 20 years in, the median Black borrower still owes 95% of the debt they originally borrowed. Think about that. You know, these are people for whom they're looking at that debt and saying that debt's going to be with me until I die. We can fix this. Canceling $50,000 in student loan debt is this, for each one of our borrowers, is the single most effective executive action that President Biden could take to help the economy and to advance racial justice in this country. If we canceled $50,000 of student loan debt, 84% of borrowers, that's 36 million people, would be completely relieved of their student loan debt. More than 3 million of these borrowers have already been carrying these debts and paying on them for more than 20 years. Canceling $50,000 in student loan debt would close the Black-white wealth gap among borrowers by 25 points. 25 points. For Latinos, the gap would close by 27 points among households with student loan debt. You know, this is something, the president just doesn't have many options by himself to be able to close the Black-white wealth gap, the Latino-white wealth gap, the way he can do it if he cancels student loan debt. Now, President Biden can do this at the stroke of a pen. In fact, you know how I know for sure that he can do this? He has already done it. He hadn't canceled all the debt, but during the pandemic, Presidents Trump and Biden together have canceled more than $80 billion in student loan interest. Not delayed it, not put it off, flat out canceled it. Look, the language of the Higher Education Act that authorizes student loans, it's absolutely clear on this. It's just a matter of our president having the will to get it done. So let me say again how grateful I am to be in this fight with the NAACP and other partners who are joining us tonight. We have such an amazing opportunity. We have an opportunity to make historic change for millions of borrowers, for people who are counting on us for help. It's within our reach. And all that's left is for us to give it one more hard push and for President Biden to sign that piece of paper. and turn loose of millions of families who are struggling with student loan debt right now. I'm convinced that the kind of partnership we've got going, the kind of folks who are on this call tonight, who are organized, who are pushing hard, we're going to work hard together and we're going to get this done. So thank you all. It is an honor to be in this fight alongside you.
Thank you so much, Senator Warren. We really appreciate you being in this fight with us and continuing to fight with us. I know that we're going to make this happen. We've been working so hard, and so continue to work arm in arm with you, as well as all those who are here on the call, all of our partners, all of our members, all of our friends who know that we can cancel student debt. So thank you for spending your time with us tonight.
Thank you.
So next, we are going to have some student debt research insights from Dr. Andre Perry. This comes from a very special partnership that we have with the Brookings Institute to ensure that we're hitting the mark in terms of the research for student debt. And so it is an honor to have Andre Perry with us here tonight.
Well, hello. As you stated, I'm Andre Perry, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution, where I examine neighborhood conditions that impact economic and social mobility of people living in Black majority neighborhoods. Much of my research revolves around wealth accumulation among Black people who know too well how generations of anti-Black exclusive policy contributed to white families amassing 10 times as much wealth as Black families. Not only did federal, state, and local legislators intentionally throttle Black wealth with malicious policies that exacerbate the legacy, the legacies of slavery, such as Jim Crow laws, biased housing, and criminal justice practices. They excluded Black Americans from reaping the full benefits of the New Deal, which lifted many more white families out of poverty and enabled them to pass on intergenerational wealth. Wealth is the sum of what a person owns minus their debts. Student debt certainly factors into the racial wealth divide. Student debt is a larger source of household indebtedness than credit cards or automobiles, and is surpassed only by home mortgages. From 1993 to 2012, the share of students taking out student loans rose roughly half to over 2/3. Between 1993 and 2020, the average loan amount grew nearly threefold, exceeding $30,000. This wouldn't be as much of the problem if borrowers' incomes increased comparably. But alas, the upsurge of tuition has outpaced the rise in wages and overall inflation. While most analysts and politicians across the political spectrum believe we have a student debt problem, there is no similar consensus in their various proposals on how to deal with it. Much of the debate revolves around how much student loan debt should be discharged. In a few moments, I will share with you why we must consider Black people's wealth when determining how much student debt we should cancel. We must center Black people in our deliberations, for it is the who in public policy that determines many budgetary considerations. Understanding the impact of student debt on Black people can shed light on how we should cancel debt for everyone. Now, bear with me as I share my screen here. Share screen. Hopefully you can see it. Very good. Let's center the experiences of people like Jordan Long. To avoid $60,000 of debt, Jordan dropped out of Morehouse College. 1 year before, billionaire philanthropist Robert F. Smith paid for the debt of 2019 graduates, essentially canceling $34 million in loans. We all remember that moment. When you learn about Jordan's family background, you know that his mother also dropped out of college because of financial reasons. We will come back to that, what's happening to Long and the Morehouse graduates towards the end of the presentation. But the point is, we struggled as a nation to appropriately center the who in public policy and research. This is particularly true in the student debt debates. We've wrongly narrowed our focus around people with high incomes. One of the most repeated mistakes in the student debt cancellation debate is the assumption that all people within particular income strata have the same ability to pay back their loans, masking the lived experiences of Black people. Colorblind income analysis missed the mark. Past discrimination should compel us to first check how policy might impact historically disenfranchised groups before we propose it. I will present evidence to show why we have an economic and moral obligation to go beyond $50,000 in debt cancellation. I will show the more debt we cancel, the more we close the wealth divide. That economic argument is clear. However, ignoring wealth and the racial wealth divide is to bury one's head in the sand to racial injustice. We have a moral obligation to go beyond 50K, to acknowledge the lived experiences of Black people across different income strata. Arguments that canceling all student debt is regressive, that it will primarily benefit the rich, fall flat. No, debt cancellation is not regressive, it's anti-racist. Most student debt is held by households with 0 to negative net worth, and Black people are overrepresented among that group. An estimated 19% of Black Americans' families have 0 to negative net worth compared to 8% of white families. Over the last quarter century, Black people went to college at higher rates, but we also took on more debt than our peers, damaging our capacity to purchase homes and start businesses. We've been told over and over again that a college education is the great equalizer, that it will provide the American dream. The reality is that white college educated households are more likely to provide and receive financial support for education and or a home purchase, while Black college graduates are significantly more likely to financially support their parents, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. In a Brookings Institution Jane Family Institute research brief, Jane Family Institute Senior Fellow Marshall Steinbaum, Brookings Research Assistant Carl Romer, and I demonstrate that Black people take out higher amounts of student loans than every other racial group. In addition, Black students' current loan balances are much more likely to exceed the original amount, revealing the impact of discrimination on wealth. This chart illuminates the results of Black people's effort to attain economic equality or the American dream, but it also shows our lack of wealth and our need for federal aid. See that blue line? That represents Black borrowers, and it exceeds every other group. In addition, Black households take longer to pay off our student debt. Again, the blue line represents Black borrowers. You can see that it takes us longer at every age group to pay off loans. Not only are individuals saddled with debt, so are entire neighborhoods. Our report titled Student Loans, the Racial Wealth Divide, and Why We Need Full Student Debt Cancellation shows student debt as a share of income is highest and growing fastest in the lowest income areas. The longest pink line shows that most borrowers are concentrated in census tracts where the median income is between $20,000 and $40,000. The claim that student debt cancellation is regressive tends to be followed by pointing out that a large number of borrowers have a small amount of debt, and a relatively minor number of borrowers carry a large proportion of the total debt burden. That much is true, but the unstated implication is that the low number of high balance borrowers uniformly have higher incomes. That implication is false. The plurality of outstanding debt is held by borrowers with higher balances who live in census tracts with which the median income is, again, between $20,000 and $40,000. So the number of borrowers and the amount are highly concentrated in those low income areas, meaning high income census tracts account for a very low number of borrowers, affirming that wealthy people are less likely to have student debt because they don't need loans. And if they take out loans, are more likely to pay them off quickly. When you look at where the debt resides, I'm playing here, where the money resides, where the debt resides. And okay, I'll move on from that pun. But again, it's held in low income neighborhoods. Other studies have reported that differences in interest accrual and graduate school borrowing lead to Black graduates holding about twice as much student debt, $53,000, as our white counterparts 4 years after graduation. Given the racial wealth disparities and the debt to income ratios, it's not surprising an estimated 7.6% of Black graduates default on loans within 4 years of graduation, compared to just 2.4% of white graduates. Without question, we have a student debt problem. Real resolution can be found when we look at the impact on wealth. When all student debt is canceled, the numerical difference between the wealth of non-Black and Black households shrinks significantly for households between the second and 20th percentiles. As Carl Romer and I describe in the report, student debt cancellation should consider wealth, not income. This chart can be difficult to interpret, but Black people represented by the perforated lines get closer to the solid lines that represent white people for every debt cancellation plan. However, we found that the more debt is canceled, the greater the wealth gap is reduced at every wealth percentile. This is why we must go beyond 50,000 in debt cancellation. We applauded Robert Smith's generosity, canceling the debt of 400 students, many of whom are now investing, buying homes, and starting businesses. Well, Jordan Long, the student that we talked about in the beginning, deserves a policy solution. There are about 42 million borrowers who take on $1.5 trillion in federal loans. Philanthropy won't solve that problem. Policy will. When policymakers and experts recognize Black lives, the policy choice becomes clear. We must go beyond $50,000 in debt cancellation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Perry. Really appreciate that. I really love how you're bringing into the context for us. And I hope that you're going to stick around as we get to question and answer, because I know folks will be having questions about how we can get away where the debt resides and make sure that we have the opportunities to really build income discretion and making sure we have the opportunity to buy homes and continue on with our lives. And so what I want to do next is I want to go over our 50K and beyond campaign. Just as you said, the more that we're able to erase debt, the more that we're able to cancel, the more beneficial it is going to be for Black borrowers. And so our campaign is all centered around making sure that we are able to cancel a minimum of 50,000 or more, because we know the more we do, the more it's going to benefit us. So first off, really thinking sure that we can understand the primary goal of the campaign being a national push for the president to cancel a minimum of 50,000. Just as Dr. Perry talked about, recognizing that is the bare minimum necessary to make a difference for Black borrowers, borrowers of color, and everybody. And so we want to make sure that we are pushing that as our standard. From there, we want to make sure our campaign is accomplishing this by making sure that we have national messaging, we're meeting with members of Congress and elected officials, and we're making sure that we are launching statewide initiatives to establish consumer protection. So for all of our members who are here on the call, we are asking for you to join with us in this campaign by making sure that you are collecting signatures, that you are building your list of members who are here in support of the cancellation of student debt. We are asking you to look at your local partners and making sure that you're working with them to ensure that they understand the ins and outs of debt cancellation. We are also asking you to share your story, recognizing that stories are very important in the work to cancel student debt, that we need to hear how this is affecting all borrowers. When I started this work in student debt cancellation, primarily was focused on millennials and Gen Z as they face the brunt of student debt as they're living in it, but recognizing that this affects all of us from boomers to Gen X, all the way to Gen Z, and all those who are still even growing up in this new world after the pandemic. And so we have to recognize that in this period of time that we need to continue to share our stories, continue to add that to the collection of stories that we have, because this is all part of fighting for the future of freedom. The way that the campaign seeks to gain support is by making sure that we're able to collect 50,000 signatures in each city and state. So for folks who are calling in from their units as a unit president, working on their political action committees, we're asking you to really get the troops together and ensure that we are able to collect 50,000 signatures in each of your cities and states. From there, we want to pass a resolution. During our national convention, we were able to pass a 50,000 in K and beyond resolution around the cancellation of student debt. And we're seeing this happen all across the country, where different cities are able to pass resolutions asking for federal legislation around student debt cancellation. Recognizing that this is stressing the entire system, all of us need to be a part of this fight. Last but not least, as I said before, we're going to be collecting 50,000 stories for 50K and beyond. I'm going to drop a link in the chat where you can go to our website. You can go check out the stories that are already submitted, as well as submitting your own stories to be a part of our collection that we're going to be submitting to Congress and to members that we're going to be advocating with. So some of you may be asking, what are our policy platforms when it comes to student debt cancellation? So as I said, in terms of the main goal, right, it's $50,000 of forgiveness for qualifying loan holders. In addition to that, we also want to think about the end of all interest on student loan repayments. Why are folks making money off of our payments? We need to make sure that ends right away. We want to reduce the timeline for loan forgiveness programs and ensure that federal employees, nonprofit workers, and veterans see this reduced from 10 years to 3 years. Right now, the current repayment programs has 1 billion of people who are part of this program, but out of the billions of people who've been part of this program, only about 32 people have actually seen loan forgiveness. That tells me that this program is not working and that we need to make sure that we are reinventing this and creating new systems and structures to ensure that folks are able to be supported properly. The fourth policy recommendation is ensuring that new loan forgiveness programs are supporting frontline and essential workers that have been affected by COVID-19. We know that we are still in a pandemic. We know that we are still in a global pandemic. And so it's absolutely necessary to recognize those who've been working so hard throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and making sure that they're being served as well. Last but not least, we want to make sure that we have an evaluation of other loan forbearance modifications centering wealth generation for low and moderate income loan holders and lower debt to income ratio. So as Dr. Perry talked about earlier, we want to recognize that there is a wealth gap. We want to recognize that this directly contributes to the wealth gap, and that by eliminating student debt, we're able to reduce the wealth gap and ensure that folks have opportunities all across America. And so as we think about our policy recommendations, as we think about our campaign, as we are getting ready to continue this fight, I want to make sure that we are centering the folks who are doing work. We are centering people who have lived experiences on the ground. And so I'm going to invite a couple of our youth student debt organizers to share their stories about how student debt has affected them, what they're doing on the ground to cancel student debt. And so I'm bringing over Patience Billingsley, who's a secretary at the University of Arkansas NAACP chapter. And after that, shortly, we'll have Jeffrey Clemens, who is our president at the Houston Tilton University, to speak on his story as well.
Good evening, everyone. I would first like to thank the NAACP for allowing me to speak on the student debt crisis and for giving a platform to amplify student voices. As a second-generation college student, student debt and loans have affected me years before I even stepped foot on a college campus. My mom graduated from the University of Arkansas with a bachelor's degree in 2003 and continued to pay off her loans throughout the completion of her master's degree in December of 2018. Due to the high interest rates and the unknown realities of life, these debts are still being paid today. This time next year, I hope to follow in my mom's footsteps and become an alumna of Arkansas. Going into my senior year, I've already taken out thousands of loans, and it looks like I will be on the same path as my mom and paying off loans well into my adult years. Many HBCUs, such as Philander Smith College, have already forgiven a portion of debt for their students. Programs like this do not exist at predominantly white institutions, such as the one I attend today. According to Sallie Mae, in 2018, more than half of families were paying for higher education through borrowed money. Only a small percentage of families had the ability to pay for college in full without any loans. This is not realistic to most Black students because we don't have the generational wealth to fall back on and experience the inequalities in the racial wealth gap. Many of my white peers at Arkansas come from money and could cover the cost of all 4 years of tuition in a single check. The Black population is my school in less than 4%, so the needs of Black students are constantly being overlooked. Because of this and the amount of money sports bring to the school, many PWIs have not considered the debt of struggling students. College is supposed to be a time where I can remember and look back on the necessary skills that prepare me for my future job and all the professional connections that I have made. While I can say I've already achieved some of these goals, at the same time, I've missed out on just as many opportunities. As a full-time student, I'm working multiple jobs to pay for required classes I need to graduate. My dreams and the dreams of other Black students of moving away from our hometowns and becoming future business owners and homeowners have been pushed back at a later date. It's become difficult to save money when the weight of these loans are so high, even if they are currently frozen. So when my family first heard of President Biden's initiative to cancel student debt, we were ecstatic. All the plans that we had pushed back were finally come to fruition. Since President Biden's inauguration, these promises are still unmet. Generations from baby boomers to Gen Z are still drowning in debt. A country that preaches the importance of higher education shouldn't make it unattainable and strive to cancel the debt of all students. This is why I've teamed up with other student debt organizers and the NAACP through various campaigns to put pressure on the Biden administration and cancel these student debts.
Thank you so much, Patience, for sharing your story and the hard work that you're doing as a student debt organizer. Patience, alongside 30 other young people across the country, have been working tirelessly to ensure that we continue this fight in the cancellation for student debt. So thank you so much for your hard work. Next up, I have Jeffrey Clemens, who is the president of Houston-Tilton University NAACP chapter.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Clemens, and I'm a student debt organizer down a little HBCU some of you might have heard of called Houston-Tilton University. And I hope you'll humor me for a moment as I go through a bit of history from here in the state of Texas, because I think it relates to the importance of why we have to cancel student debt here in the United States. We're down the street from Big Orange Cal School, the University of Texas, and although we pride ourselves, we actually pride ourselves on being the first since we were founded in 1875, 1 year before UT and even before the state legislature let ink roll on the Constitution our state still abides by today. Indeed, when we wrote that Constitution, they actually wrote institutions like mine out of it. Despite setting aside about 2 million acres of land in West Texas, the investments upon which they would use to fund Texas public schools and universities, they made no special allocation for the education of Black Texans in the form of land grant institutions, special tracts, or otherwise, as had been done in other states across the country at the time. So while Texas continued to grow and the student population with it, our little institutions forged our own path and out of necessity and in determination to make our own opportunities. The legacy of this decision could not be more clear today, however, as the University of Texas received about $1 billion from the Permanent University Fund in the last fiscal year. They, of course, aren't the only institution, but all of the institutions in the University of Texas and Texas A&M systems that get a hefty pump of money every year from the PUF, which is now worth somewhere north of $30 billion. This has meant that they've had the opportunity to expand their distinguished programs to attract top talent from around the world, build new dormitories, and even waive the tuition of some of their low-income students. Meanwhile, just down the road, my little HBCU, Houston-Tilton, has had to, like so many HBCUs across the country, punch above our weight to do more for our students. As student debt organizer with the NAACP, I've heard many stories from my peers about how difficult it is to make ends meet so they can continue holding on to an opportunity for a brighter future than the one they've been promised when they graduated from high school. That's what HBCUs do. We take in and those who don't have opportunities before and open up doors for them. This is important because the majority of our nation's Black professionals are HBCU alum. And so this conversation that we're having tonight is critical and timely as we consider what the future of our Black youth are going to be in this country. Students who attend HBCUs borrow at almost 90% higher rates than their peers at PWIs because they're more often on the very low end of the socioeconomic spectrum, perhaps to none of our surprise. And yet, believe that attending one of these distinguished institutions, despite the high tuition they must often pay to keep the doors open, will provide them with the opportunity to achieve something greater. Yet many of these students graduate with far more debt than their peers and have an even tougher time getting a job in the market. Many of my peers who I've talked to have told me about the anxieties they have about graduating, having to play catch up and deferring their dreams in favor of trying to save off debt they've accumulated in the meantime. Rather than granting them a key to economic freedom, student loans have actually shackled them to a different kind of economic slavery. And here's another fact. Because of the historic decrease in Pell Grant funding, one of the most critical forms of aid that low-income students rely upon when they're going to college, including myself, HBCU students are having to pay increasingly large costs of their education out of pocket, which puts pressure on them to work more jobs and study less, potentially decreasing their chances of graduating and stifling the pipeline of Black talent we need to move this country forward. When anyone goes to school, their first concern should be how to make the grade and not how they're going to balance something to eat, taking care of routine maintenance, and also paying for their tuition. I've heard from many and seen too many of my peers struggling to make it, who could be spending more of their time building the network and relationships they need to succeed in our world today, especially as people of color. When they get out of school, they should not have to continue toiling away until they land the right job, but have a guarantee that they can start with 2 feet forward rather than 1 foot behind them. You all may have heard that Huston-Tillotson also received a fairly generous donation that allowed us to cancel some of our students' debt, but that only covers one generation of student scholars who are going forward to be able to progress. It should not fall on a few benevolent philanthropic organizations, however, or individual donors to lift Black students across the country from under this burden, especially when America bears some of the blame for us being set back. The question that Lyndon B. Johnson gave us was, what the hell is the presidency for if not to serve those who have been underserved? And so tonight I am hoping to lay before us a question of what good is our federal government as a whole if it has no intention to help all of us in the process. And so I believe that we must cancel student debt starting at the $50,000 level and going further. The Biden administration will hear us once all of our organizing is done. And so I thank you all for the opportunity to speak tonight, and I'll turn it back over to Wisdom.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for sharing your story and sharing the work that you're doing down there in Texas. We really appreciate it, and to really show that HBCUs are leading the way in this fight against the cancellation of student debt. So I'm super glad that you and Patience were able to be here tonight to also show the work that you're doing. We want to make sure that we're continuing to develop and support young organizers and organizers across the entire NAACP in their advocacy skills. And so later on tonight, we'll have a report out in terms of the upcoming advocacy trainings for cancellation of student debt from our Director of Advocacy, Marnice Jackson. But thank you all so much for being here this evening. Next, I would like to turn it over to our National Director of Partnerships, Annalise Santori, who's going to talk about how our partners who are here on the call can sign on, as well as talk about some of the work that our partners are doing currently in the field.
Thank you so much, Wisdom. Good evening, leaders and partners. My name is Annalise Satori, and I'm the National Director of Partnerships with the NAACP. As a student debt holder myself, I am thrilled to be here with you this evening discussing the importance of student loan debt relief. And I'm even more thrilled that so many of you could join us tonight. I'd like to take a moment to hear what organizations we have with us tonight. Some of you introduced yourselves earlier, but I would love if you could take some time, put your name in the chat and what organization you're representing. We want to see who's in the house with us. So far, I have Phi Beta Sigma in the house. We have Sigma Gamma Rho. I love it. Kappa Alpha Psi, Planned Parenthood. I love it. So we have a conglomerate of partners with us. And I'm excited to talk to you about what partnership on this campaign looks like. So far tonight, we've heard research from Dr. Perry. We've had student testimonials from our NAACP student leaders, and we've gotten an overview of the campaign from Wisdom. We want our partners across the nation and from organizations across different professions, disciplines, and backgrounds to join us in this fight to advocate for student debt cancellation policy. This cancellation will benefit all demographics, as you've heard from Dr. Perry. It will eliminate racial disparities in student debt, and it's going to boost our struggling economy. So what does it mean to become a partner with this campaign? Becoming a partner means that we would share your organization's name and logo on our promotional materials alongside the NAACP's name and logo. So this can include campaign-related collateral, letters that we send out, etc. We also want to amplify any work that your organization is doing around the student debt crisis. Your work is very important, and we want to make sure that we highlight it. As one of our partners, we'll ask that you assist with outreach and promotion via email and social media. We don't want you to worry. The NAACP will provide a toolkit that's going to have all of the resources you'll need to send a strong message. Later on, my colleague Marnice will share some advocacy trainings and what those look like. We want you and your friends to tell more friends to join us. The more people we have working on this, the more reach we have, and the more reach we have, the louder our collective voice is going to be. Lastly, we ask that you encourage members of your organization to share your stories via the NAACP Cancel Student Debt Story Portal. I'm going to drop that link in the chat to where you can go ahead and share your stories. Coming right now. There we go. we want to feature all our member stories. So NAC, that's Ace. He says hello. We want to feature all of our member stories because all of our stories matter and all of our stories are important. If you're ready to sign on and become a partner, I'm going to drop another link in the chat. We just need you to fill this out, get back to us, include your logo. If you have any questions at all, if you want to have a one-on-one conversation with me to discuss, I am happy to do so. I'm happy to set up a call with you or your organization's leaders. You can email me at asatori@naacpnet.org. Earlier in this conversation, I mentioned that we want to amplify our partners' work around student loan debt. And I am delighted to introduce to you our next speaker, Dr. Erica Taylor from the National Education Association, one of our partners. She's going to share some of the work that NEA is doing surrounding student loan debt among educators. And I am so excited that you're here, Dr. Taylor. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annalise. Can you hear me clearly? Great. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Erica Taylor, and I am a senior research analyst at NEA. And I'm honored to speak with you this evening about our work with student loan debt among educators. Next slide, please. As a number of our speakers have already pointed out, between 2007 and 2021, student loan debt in this country has steadily increased from just over $500 billion in 2007 to more than $1.5 trillion this year. In our report that we released approximately 2 weeks ago, entitled Student Loan Debt Among Educators, a National Crisis, we talk about systemic reasons as to why we are in this place, including federal disinvestment in higher education, pay inequities among teachers by race and ethnicity, and systemic racism. And these issues make the issue of student loan debt much more complex than just a group of misguided people making poor financial decisions, as is often the narrative. We argue that there are policies and structures in place that have been designed to get the results that we see in this graphic. Next slide, please. We asked the nearly 2,500 educators whom we surveyed about their financial circumstances more broadly and student loan debt more specifically. And what they told us was that approximately 45% of them said that they had taken out loans to fund their education. On average, they borrowed nearly $56,000, with 30% of those who had taken out loans taking out $65,000 or more, and 11% took out $105,000 or more. It's also worth noting that their current balances, on average, exceed the amount that's shown here that they actually took out. Next slide, please. In the interest of time, I won't go through any specific data points at the moment, but I will share our key takeaways. First and foremost, our findings suggest that student loan debt has impacted all sectors of education, despite job classification, level of income, and level of education, whether it's PK-12 or higher education. Student loan debt has impacted all of those areas. However, we also found that student loan debt affects specific groups differently, as has already been pointed out. For example, our younger educators are more likely to take out loans, and when they do, they take out larger amounts than their older, more experienced counterparts. Our educators of color, particularly our Black educators, are more likely to borrow for their education and subsequently owe more, And our educators of color also tend to have more difficulty repaying their debts. Second, with the increasing costs for college students, wages that lag significantly behind other professionals with similar levels of education, and systemic racism baked into multiple levels of education, it's abundantly clear as to why we are seeing what we see in terms of the system. In addition to that, the disinvestment in public higher education and other issues are promoting the issues that we see as it relates to student loan debt. Thirdly, educators have told us that their decision to borrow money so that they could ultimately do what they believe they've been called to do is having an impact on their financial stability and their ability to shape their own futures. Many are forgoing basic needs like food and purchasing homes to do what they love, and none of us will be able to do what we do without them. Fourth, student loan debt has significant implications for the future of education in terms of the diversity, the quality, and the abundance of the teaching force. The current situation that we have in terms of student loan debt is not sustainable. Next slide, please. NEA is doing several things to support educators through this crisis. NEA Member Benefits has partnered with a company called Savvy to support NEA members through the loan forgiveness process. To date, this partnership has helped members to get more than $1 million in loans forgiven through these programs. We're also engaging policymakers to advocate, first and foremost, for the broad cancellation of $50,000 of federal student debt for all borrowers. In addition, we're advocating for the cancellation of student debt for every public service worker who has worked and paid federal loans for 10 years or more. We're also calling on the federal government to reform their loan forgiveness program. We're also continuing to conduct and publish research that will help us learn more about the ways in which student loan debt adversely affects the teaching force now and will continue to do so in the future without proper and immediate intervention. Next slide, please. In addition to providing supports for our experienced educators, the National Education Association is home to a program called Nea Aspiring Educators. This program membership consists of 40,000 college students from across the country who are preparing to enter the education profession. Over the past few years, NEA Aspiring Educators have organized around student debt crisis and voiced the impacts of student debt on the recruitment and retention of new college education majors, particularly new education majors of color. The program supports, develops, and empowers diverse pre-service teachers to become the professional, equitable, socially, and racially just educators that our country desperately needs. Next slide, please. For more information about student loan debt supports, you can visit our website at the link below. Feel free to reach out to me regarding the recently released Student Loan Debt Among Educators report. For more information about Aspiring Educators program, please visit their website, which is shown below, or contact Cameo Kendrick, who is the chair of the program. Thank you for your time and enjoy your evening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor, for being here with us tonight. Really appreciate you sharing the work that the NEA is doing to cancel student debt. We love to hear the alignment that's happening with our campaigns, and so we're going to continue to collaborate. Thank you to Annalise as well for telling us about how you can join as a partner. And thank you to Ace for saying hello and also saying cancel student debt. We appreciate everybody who's been supportive of this campaign. As you can see, we have an amazing team who's working together to ensure that we hit every single point and angle for this campaign. Next, we'd like to introduce Marnice Jackson, who's going to be talking about the advocacy trainings that are coming up after this training that you can be a part of, that you can join and learn how to cancel student debt.
Good evening, leaders, partners, and members. My name is Marnice Jackson, and thank you so much for being here and all the hard work that you're doing. So I want to highlight a lot of our trainings that are coming up starting next week at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The first one is introducing city council resolutions, right? This is very important on the local level. It will talk about the 50K in repayment programs, and we will take a deeper dive on how to craft your city council resolutions. On September 1st at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll talk about the advocacy intersections of student loan debt. This is very important because student loan debt impacts our health, it impacts housing, it intersects with racial justice, as we have heard from our partners and our guests. And then also it impacts reproductive justice. I bet a lot of us didn't know that. So please come out to that one. And then we will provide story tips, storytelling tips and list building on how you can tell your story when you're out in the field doing your organizing for this campaign. And then lastly, on September the 22nd at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will go into a student debt legislative action plan. So this is on how you create your legislative action plan and how you talk to your local and state government and your representatives. So please tune into these different trainings. If you need access to getting registered, please contact me at mjackson@nwacp.org or Wisdom. So we look forward to seeing you there, and taking a deeper dive on how we can kill the student loan debt. Have a wonderful night, and I'll pass it back to Wisdom.
Thank you so much, Marnice, for letting our folks know how they can continue to get involved. Definitely want to urge our members, our units, even our partners, join us this coming Wednesday, the Wednesdays afterwards, to ensure that you are learning the skills and tactics necessary to cancel student debt. We have amazing content. We have amazing creations that are coming up as well. And so we want to make sure that you have access to all of that and how to begin to build your list, how to begin to pass your resolutions. And so thank you so much, Marnice, for sharing those upcoming trainings. So we are reaching the end of our webinar. If you have a question, I'm going to ask you to place it in the Q&A chat, not in the actual chat, but in the Q&A chat. And our National Director of Governance and Engagement, Quincy Bates, will actually be helping us field those questions tonight. We have a panel of amazing activists, organizers, researchers, folks who've been doing this work day in, day out. And so we definitely want you to urge you to ask the questions necessary to get you to be a part of this campaign, questions that you have around, advocating and list building, passing resolutions, whatever you feel necessary to continue to be a part of this campaign. Definitely feel free to drop it in the Q&A chat. But I will pass it over to Quincy.
Awesome. Thanks, Wisdom. Good evening, everyone. We have a lot of questions from our attendees this evening, but we're only going to take about 4 questions live. All the other questions I'm going to curate and provide to Wisdom and his team so that they can answer for our attendees, and we'll put together a FAQ sheet that we'll share at a later date. So we're going to start with our first question. It comes from Mr. Jay Brennan. I hope I said your name correct. Mr. Jay, you have the floor. And Jay, you're on mute if you're trying to speak. Okay, we'll go to our next person. Our next question comes from Ms. Keisha Scott. Ms. Scott, you have the floor.
Actually, I do believe Mr. Brennan is on screen. We're just trying to get him off of mute.
I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
There you go. Okay, there you go.
You can hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah, so really quick. So hearing about student debt, I remember during the debates and President Biden was talking about how rich kids like his son who went to, I think, Yale don't need student debt cancellation. And from what I've seen, I have one kid who went to a state public school, and I think more kids who go to the in-state public school had student debt when they graduated than the students who go to these like very elite sort of private schools, because the endowments at these elite private schools are so large per student that they end up having very little debt when they leave. Whereas I think just the typical student who goes in-state to a public college will have more debt. I think that's my impression. So I wonder if the experts knew about any of that.
Yeah, well, what's interesting, there are a very small number of elite private schools that you describe with large endowments, and within relatively recent time period, they've essentially provided aid for low need, for high need students. But remember, the overwhelming majority of students that attend private institutions are taking on significant amounts of debt. One of the reasons why Biden and Obama canceled significant debt because proprietary institutions, essentially people were going there and not graduating, and or they were could not get jobs to pay off their debt. And so a lot of those private institutions, and do not forget about those institutions, that's where a lot of people taking on debt. So I think there, if you're talking Harvard, Princeton, Cornell, a few other places, but they represent such a small fraction of the students who are taking on debt at these private institutions. And one more thing to add, remember, I'm a big fan of HBCUs, and it's those private HBCUs that are really getting hammered because they're taking on students that other people won't take on. So many of the state colleges, because of their admissions policies, are not taking in students. HBCU private ones are taking them on, but they have a significant number of students with high need. So, you know, a lot of students, if you're going to Morehouse, Spelman, I mean, a lot of them are taking on significant debt. So though we should cancel those debts as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. J. Our next question comes from Ms. Keisha Scott. Ms. Scott, you have the floor.
Hi, I just wanted to ask about if there are any programs that are available where we can volunteer to teach some of our students that are coming out of high school or even going into college, teach them a little bit of financial literacy so they can understand how that interest rate has a big impact on their payments and a big impact on any of their financial decisions.
May I add one more? I mean, there's lots of programs. The issue though is we ask people to go to college because if you don't go, the consequences are severe. And so financial literacy isn't the reason why we have this student debt crisis. It's really the lack of financial literacy among higher ed leaders. I was a dean, and whenever there was a problem with our budget, guess what we did? We raised tuition.
Right.
And guess who shouldered the burden of that? Students.
Yeah.
And so I always say, yeah, we do need financial literacy. It's among college presidents, not because it's students. And that's where the problem is. And even if we cancel student debt, this is just part of the problem. Eventually, we need to solve for the lack of cost containment or price increase, particularly among private institutions. You have some cost control at state schools because you have state legislators who will say, no, we're not going to increase tuition again. But on the private side, we don't have that kind of pushback. But in this campaign, we have to make sure we don't give the illusion that it's the students' fault.
No, it's not.
And I know what you're not trying to say.
I don't think it's their fault at all. Just to benefit them to understand it.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that I wasn't saying you do, but there is a argument out there that students need to know more and make better decisions. But this is a policy disaster that it's just hard to navigate. And by the way, you know, Erica Taylor brought up some great points. And, you know, and what's interesting, I always make this point, in the K-12 arena, I mean, if you can imagine that every student has essentially a grant to go to a public school.
Right.
And you could drop out, you could mess up, you could do whatever, you're not asked to pay that grant. You're not, you know, that's why we call it basic education. Now higher ed is basic, but we are making people pay for it. Mm-hmm. And so when we cancel this debt, we also need to have some level of free college. I would argue among public institutions moving forward. So this is, I mean, and this is also the language, this is just the start of higher ed reform moving forward, but it's an important start. We got to do this, but then after the next campaign, right after that, is about making college free, particularly at the public institutions.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Our next question comes from Ms. Cheryl Thomas. Ms. Thomas, you have the floor.
Ms. Thomas. If not, Quincy, we can just move to the next person.
Yep, gotcha. Okay, we have one more question. This comes from Mr. John Kemp. He's actually being brought over now. Just 1 second for Mr. Kemp. There you go, Mr. Kemp. You have the floor.
So good evening, everybody. I really appreciate the great work that you're doing. It's extremely frustrating for me traveling to Germany once a year, where I see such a small country with less resources than ours, have everyone going to school debt free, including Turkish nationals, African nationals, people from other countries. So my question specifically is, me being a Generation Xer, I feel like myself, along with probably about 3 or 4 million other Generation Xers, we're sort of in between. We're mostly retired military, some of us. We have a skill set. We're very educated. Is there a way that we can perhaps set up some sort of reverse bounty with area companies? For example, I do remote work for a Fortune 500. That salary goes to a pot and a repayment plan for indebted students.
I mean, one of I think the points that was made, I think a couple people made this point that corporations are doing interesting things. Philanthropy is doing interesting things. But when you're talking about $1.5 trillion in debt, that's a federal response. I mean, we were right on track when you were talking about there are countries that now understand that the cost of not providing free college is too much to bear. And that's where we are now. So many problems in society are a result because we've put higher ed and its other essential goods in private markets, when in fact, like I said, we should have preschool paid for, K through 12 should have public option, and higher ed the same. And now you can debate whether or not the public schools should be free or all institutions. I mean, there's some debate there, but we have to provide the kinds of services that are going to propel the economy to propel students in this knowledge economy. And it's hurting us that we are forcing people to pay extreme amounts of money to do what society wants them to do anyway.
Right. Yeah, the frustration is that, for example, here in Biloxi, the poorest community on this Gulf Coast is surrounded by 8 casinos, multi-billion-dollar.
Right. That's right.
And we also have 3 times the unemployment rate as the entire Gulf Coast when we're closest to the biggest employers.
Yeah.
And I was in a meeting last night about community policing, and everything is contributed to the lack of education and the lack of things for young people to do, which comes back to what you're talking about, sir.
Yeah.
But again, I appreciate the information. We're striving here and around the country, and I look forward to working with the rest of you all doing great work.
And I know Erica Taylor is appreciating the Norman Rockwell, Ruby Bridges print behind you.
Love it.
All those, you got to have that. I see your mind state. That's a good look.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, and the last question is going to be from Miss Delphine Brown. Miss Brown, we have you on screen. If you can turn your camera on, the floor will be yours.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My question is about the interest on student loans. And I had an opportunity to take a student loan and also the opportunity to pay it off. But before I paid it off, it went into debt collection. And it was a small amount. The loan itself had doubled based on the interest. So my question is, within this campaign, is it part of asking that I know maybe it has to be a little interest, but maybe eliminate the interest, because when it starts doubling the loan, the original amount, that's what makes the loan impossible to pay off. So I would like to see that interest, something about that interest taken away.
Yeah, I mean, I thought we saw that in the campaign, it was cancel interest as well. I mean, the reason why in general, I mean, there's other reasons, but a big reason why it takes much longer for Black people to pay off their loans is because we often we don't get jobs that will enable us to pay off pay off our principal down. And so this interest keeps accruing and accruing and accruing, and before you know it, you're putting down a payment, and your principal is not going anywhere, and that's a problem. So without question, canceling interest is a part of the campaign.
Okay, and the other thing is,
Dr. Perry.
The other thing is the taking student loan debt and putting it in collection. You know, it really hinders individuals getting jobs, getting credit. I can't move forward because now you put me in, I've got a job, I want to pay it off, but now you put me in collection, and now I have a black mark with my employer.
And this is why many student borrowers have a much more difficult time purchasing homes, starting businesses, getting adequate car loans and such. You know, debt, you know, we talk about wealth begets wealth, but debt begets debt. And student loans are just a drag on people's ability to move. And so you're absolutely right. We're doing research now where we're examining the potential effects of debt cancellation on credit scores. And so be on the lookout for that kind of research. But yeah, we need to cancel all that. I mean, it needs to go because it is a burden, and it's between credit cards, student debt, hospital bills. These are the things that are really holding Black people back, and we got to eliminate all of this. And if we can do it with student debt, we can then start talking about hospital bills and other drags on people's wallets.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ms. Brown. Thanks, Wilson. Turning it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Quincy. Thank you all so much for all the amazing questions you had. Thank you, Dr. Perry, for helping to field those amazing questions and making sure that our members are informed. I really love that you are connecting the fight into cancellation of student debt to free college, recognizing that just doing financial literacy isn't enough and isn't going to support students in actually progressing forward. And so I'm super glad to have you here tonight. I'm also very glad to have Senator Warren here tonight, who said amazing remarks, as well as our staff, Annalise Santori, Marnice Jackson, and Quincy Bates, as well as Kevin Miles, our Director of Trainings. We have an amazing team that is doing great work and wanting to ensure that you have all the resources necessary to cancel student debt. I also want to thank Dr. Taylor for also being here to share the work that our partners are doing. And we're super glad that our partners could be here tonight to also join in with our campaign. The last thing that I'm going to have you all do before we wrap up tonight and before I pass it back to our President and CEO, Derek Johnson, is I'm going to put a click it to tweet action in the chat. You can click that link right there. It goes directly to our 50K and Beyond web landing page. You can tweet that out to your followers, let people know that you are getting a part of this campaign, that you are on board to cancel student debt, that you want to see 50,000 and beyond be canceled, as well as the other policy points that we talked about earlier. And so I want you to get involved with us today, tweet that out, let people know that you are part of this campaign because we need you. This work is done because we need each other and that we are fighting for the future of freedom. And so thank you so much for being here tonight. And I will pass it back to our President and CEO for our closing remarks.
Thank you, Wisdom, and thank you, Dr. Perry, with such insightful information. There were several questions in the chat you covered through your PowerPoint. I hope you will allow us to have the PowerPoint on the website so people can walk through it because it is insightful. oftentimes we get into the routine of doing what we've always done because that's the routine of what we've done. And student loan debt is one of those scenarios that people think this is the way it's supposed to be because it's always been that way. But it's not normal. It is actually very abnormal. The gentleman talked earlier about just leaving from Germany. Germany's a way of training their workers and allowing them to advance is much more productive and conducive to a future that's inclusive as opposed to this predatory nature by which we are putting young people in. For African Americans, it's really important because for so many years we were told in order to be successful, you got to go to school, get good grades, so you go to college, get good grades, and get a good job or go on to professional grad school. And what we have learned as a result of shifting to that mindset, losing many of our skills as plumbers, as carpenters and other hard skills, that it was a trap at the end of the door, that when we walked out of the institution with a degree in hand, we didn't realize the financial impact it will have on us for almost a lifetime for many people. And so this is that opportunity for us, step one, to cancel the student loan debt. And I'm loving that Dr. Perry is already keying up that step two is to address some higher ed reform so that we can truly live the promise of America. And so for that, I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. Wisdom, great job as usual. Annalise, thank you for opening up for our partners to join in because this is not about an organization. This is about the holistic community that we love, that we work for, and that we represent. So have a good night, and let's continue to advocate for the future that we want to be a part of. Fighting forward.